Why, hello there. Welcome to the Digitally Overwhelmed podcast. My name is Cynthia. I am super excited to have you here. This is episode 142 of the podcast. And as I said, I'm Cynthia. I run Digital Bloom IQ, where I help health and wellness businesses get found in Google and heal more of the world. So we're going to be talking all about why SEO takes time. And this is a question I get asked a lot in my work. And I'm really excited to talk to you guys about it today because I have a lot of things I want to say about it and to really inspire you to think about it a little bit differently. Why you might feel like it's not the greatest thing that SEO takes time, and some specific reasons why this is just a reality, and what to do about it. So before I start, I do want to mention that if you are really wanting to get started on your SEO journey, I highly recommend my SEO audit checklist. I've gotten amazing feedback on this. A lot of people have been taking action on some of the foundational elements of their website without having to spend hours and hours searching all over the internet and figuring out, what needs to be done. So the checklist is a list of items that I've put together of just like the basics of what you need to have in place to start ranking in Google. So you can download your own checklist by going to my website, digitalbloomiq.com/SEO-checklist. And there you'll be able to sign up and download it. And you can also get that link and more information about this episode and just more information in general. I try to make the show notes really great on my website. Again, digitalbloomiq.com/SEO/timing. That's the URL for this episode 142 and the show notes. So, like I said, I get asked this question quite a lot, why does SEO take time? And over the years, I've had different reactions to this. And initially, I kind of was getting nervous because I get it. We want to see results fast in our businesses. We want to, reach where we're going at a certain pace. We have things to do, people to see. But now my stance is, and maybe this will change, maybe I'll record this topic in a year from now and it'll be different. But my reaction is like, what's the rush? What's the rush, guys? Like, I get it. I also have goals that I want to happen in the short term and the long term. But I've come to understand that I'm really invested in my business for the long haul. And so if something is going to take time, if anything, it's going to just help me get more grounded of like what I need to be doing, right? To make that happen over months and months of time. And Choco has joined our episode. So I think if you want to be successful in your business, thinking a minimum of like 3 to 6 months to test things out and to experiment and to pivot, that's normal, that's natural. And if that isn't something that, you're willing to invest, then I recommend just looking at what you want to do with your business, because strong businesses take time. And initially, maybe your worry with this time thing is that things will change. So it's kind of like a commitment fear of like, oh, I'm going to invest all this in SEO and it's not going to work out. And so first of all, there is like, okay, yeah, but like, wouldn't you rather invest and see if it did work out? Like, what if it did work out? What if you were able to attract all these clients and traffic and just change the world by answering people's questions through Google, right? And that's the first thing. But the second thing is that if you feel like you might be pivoting pretty quickly because you're experimenting and you're in like an initial phase, then that's totally fine. And SEO can pivot with you, right? And there can be a strategy behind it. Now, if your business has been online for a while and you just know it's going to take time, then you're probably thinking about this a little bit differently. And this question is more like, well, what are the factors that come into play when Google is looking at our site? So I'm going to get into those in a second. But first, I wanted to just really kind of confront this thing of like, I'm rushed and like, I want the results yesterday. And my favorite analogy, you guys know if you've been listening to me for any amount of time, is I love analogies. So my favorite analogy for this question is like, you're growing a garden, right? So you want some pretty awesome vegetables. You know, maybe you have some fruits in there as well if you're like in a tropical place. And it's going to take time. You know, you're going to plant the seed and you know that you're not going to see a plant tomorrow or even in a week or maybe even in a month. You know, some plants take time. But you know that there's a seed there, you know it's going to grow. And what's the rush? You know, what's the rush? And at the end of the day, all Google is looking for and all people and the humans are looking for is great content. Amazing content that just changes their lives, that creates this connection that they have with you that they're never going to forget. And they're not going to have that same experience that they have through your website than on social media or any other platform, right? Each platform has its pros and cons. And I think search just creates a really unique experience of someone finding you answering their question, and you know, them just never forgetting that, right? And you creating this amazing opportunity for them to continue to come to your site and get to know you and all that stuff. So let's get into some of the reasons of why, from a technical point of view, why SEO takes time. And then we're going to be talking about some actions you can take to kind of consider this into your own marketing plan and to like factor that in. So the first one, and this is kind of something I've already mentioned, is creating good content takes time. So you've got revisions, you know, maybe you have a team, and so you're building out long form pieces of content. You might be building out a guide or just like a really useful step-by-step process. There might be infographics, there might be videos. You might have really awesome formatting with images that are beautiful. And so that just takes time. And that is the name of the game when it comes to SEO, because you are trying to step away from your competition and show people that you are really here to help them in a deep and meaningful way. And I know that's who you are, and you're listening to this. You're not just here for like empty visits. You're here because you really care about helping other people and you really care about making a difference in their life. And so creating that kind of content, it takes time to think about it and to write it and then to, add to it, something that we do as part of my AIM process, which is my unique SEO process that I take my clients through, is in the implementation phase. We go back and we actually improve existing pieces of content. So this is something that gets overlooked. We're so focused on creating new content, but we actually need to make sure that existing content is performing and doing its best. And even as we progress into the monitor phase, many of my clients are shocked that we go back and improve the content that we just created. And that's the process. It's not just about, if we continue with this growing a garden analogy, it's not like, let's just buy like new plants and new seeds all the time. We're actually going back and feeding the old plants and, adding fertile soil and, whatever, turning soil over. Obviously, I'm not as huge into gardening. I should probably get into the techniques of it, but you get what I'm saying, right? So that's one of the bigger reasons of why SEO can take time. And even if you have a team and you have people helping you, it still takes that time of like letting that content sit there and seeing how it performs, looking at your Google Analytics data, looking at bounce rate, and just getting a sense of like, how can I improve this? How can I make this even better than it is before? So another factor that we need to consider is that it takes time for Google to recognize a whole website and give it authority. And so it's not like, okay, this is more for websites that are new, brand new. And actually, if you are starting a brand new website, I highly recommend you check out episode 130, which is SEO for new sites, because there I go through really specifically what I think you need to be doing versus maybe an older site. So if you're starting out, it takes time for Google to really look at your site and understand that it's a trustworthy and authority site that has useful content. And it takes time for it to just understand not just what your site is about, but make sure that it's in the right area of searches, and it's competing against similar content, right? So this also kind of connects with my next point, which is it takes time to build like a body of work that Google will recognize as a website. So sorry, let me be a little bit clearer there. So Google is really smart nowadays in determining not just like specific, unique, individual pieces of content, but it really looks at like the overall theme of our websites. And this relates a little bit to the update that was in 2013, the Hummingbird update, where Google really built a part of the algorithm that would understand the relationship between several keywords and themes of content. So this, the Hummingbird update was something that impacted when you search for something, you're not just going to get, like, let's say if you search, like how Chinese food in New York, right? So Google really understands the logic of those keywords, and it understands that you are in New York and you're looking locally for Chinese food, right? And it's not just looking before that update and in the past, Google would look at those words in an isolated way, and it would like extrapolate that, and maybe it would like just like look for Chinese things in New York, or maybe it would even mix up that like maybe it was like Chinese people, or like people from New York in China. Like it didn't understand the logic, and so it's really, really awesome. And Google has become so smart at really understanding our intention, right? Our search intent, and understanding what our site is about overall and the themes, right? So what does this have to do with SEO taking time? So the reality is, if you have a brand new site, it's going to take time for you to build several pieces of content that have an overall theme that makes sense together. So in my case, I write and talk a lot about SEO, but I also talk about Google Analytics, and I also talk about content marketing, and I also just talk about digital marketing in general. And so all those themes make sense, and Google can understand that my website is about SEO, but it also has other types of digital marketing involved there. So that takes time for Google to build. Now, how does this relate to like an older site? So what happens with older sites is that maybe instead of adding new content, we're actually removing content and making your site just more concise. And so when I say removing, we're not necessarily deleting, although in some cases we might actually be telling Google, hey, don't pay attention to these blog posts, and we take them out of the index. So this is all something I do as part of my AIM process in the implementation phase. And that's why I feel like SEO is not this robotic thing. It's actually very curated, depending on your goals and depending on where your site is right now. Okay, so the next kind of reason or factor to look at when we're looking at why Google takes time is that user behavior is a big part of what defines the ranking factor. So Google looks at how the humans are interacting with your site, and it collects that data, and it looks at things like linger time. So how long are people lingering on your page? Something like bounce rate, are people entering to your page and then getting out and then looking at the next search results. And so that takes time for Google to collect and to make sense of it, right? And the algorithm is really smart nowadays. So it's definitely something that happens faster, but it can take its time. And so even if you've got a site that's been up for a while, if you're doing SEO more intentionally by working with an SEO expert, it's going to take time for those shifts to happen as you add new content or tweak old content and like re-index it and that sort of thing. Okay, I have a couple more things, and these are a little bit more technical. Of course, competition plays into why something might be taking time. So if you are competing in a keyword category that is very competitive, it's going to be harder for you to reach that, but it still could be worth it. So you might say, I rather compete against a really competitive keyword and start now because I know in a year from now I'm going to be on page 1. So it is really about a marathon, and it's really it just depends kind of what you have going on. And this is something I talk with my clients about. I give them keywords that are really inside of their my favorite analogy for this is, I'm not a boxer, but this is the best analogy. The small weights do never ever compete against the heavyweights. It's just like, it doesn't make any sense because they're just different sized guys. So the same thing with your keyword competition is, if you're a heavyweight, you never want to be competing against a small weight. Or it's a lightweight, maybe that's the proper term. And then if you're a small weight, obviously competing against a heavyweight doesn't make sense. So looking at your competition is going to make a big difference. Something like domain age and domain registration length and domain history are all smaller factors. So Google does look at, how long has this domain been online, or how long is this domain registered in the future? Or what is the history of this domain? Has there been any spamminess involved with this? These aren't as important as the content, the first thing that I mentioned, but it is something that Google does take a look at. So obviously, if your site has been around, even if you haven't been blogging that much, if it's been around for a while, you might actually find it easier to rank than if you just registered it yesterday. And finally, linking domain age. So I've talked a lot about backlinking on the podcast. I could talk more about it. I think that's going to be a big thing. Let me know. I'm always curious to hear what you guys have questions about. And the fastest way to get those questions to me, or just kind of ask me things, is through my Instagram. So it's at digitalbloomiq. And you can just DM me and we can just see, what are your top questions, because I want to create really great content. Okay, so linking domain age it has to do with the age of the domains who are linking back to you. So again, that just has to do with how long you've been online, how long you've been interacting with other businesses, and how useful your content has been, so that over the years, people just keep linking to it because it's just so helpful. So those are kind of the technical reasons. And when it comes down to it, I think it's great that SEO takes time. I think it makes it so that the people who are really committed to creating great content are really interested in the long-term game. And even if their business changes, or even if they make some pivots, that doesn't take away the fact that they're going to create great content, and that process of creating great content is going to help them become better at what they do. And I can use the example of this podcast. When I started this podcast, I didn't know anything about podcasting. I just kind of learned by doing, and I feel like the act of creating the podcast has gotten me better at speaking about formulating my own thoughts and just teaching, which I love so much. So think about it that way. Instead of this thing of like, is it going to work or not? How are you going to use this as a vehicle to develop yourself? And if your site has been up for a while, maybe it's more about a curation sort of strategy instead of just adding random keywords. So yeah, I think that the focus is create amazing content. Think of it as a marathon and not a sprint. And the last thing I want to mention is that I do believe that you can make a smart decision and a good investment in SEO without just turning a blind eye to a timeline. So one of the ways we get around this, and this is something that is very much part of my AIM process, is we look at how does SEO function as part of an ecosystem, as part of your marketing ecosystem, and integrating with the rest of everything you're doing on your marketing. So instead of seeing it as this isolated thing, you really want it to be part of everything else you're creating. And so the way to do that is that just getting intentional and creative around how you recycle and reuse content across several channels. So again, this podcast is a good example. I create blog posts for every single one of these episodes using my show notes, using some extra information that I want to add there. And those blog posts go out every week and they're really helpful. So instead of doing a separate blog post and then a podcast, I combine them. And so there's lots of creative ways that you can do that. Maybe you have a video series, and so you create a whole blog post with several videos that you'd created. Maybe you use your email newsletters, maybe old email newsletters you have, and revamp them and make them great blog posts. So that's totally on you, but I just feel like it doesn't have to be this like whole other thing that's makes a whole other, because that feels so heavy, like, oh, like I need to get the energy up to do SEO. And I feel like, yeah, it could be something you sit down and dedicate your heart to solely. But in most cases, it actually could start as something you are kind of like running with in the rest of your marketing. And then once you get results, you can go back and get more intentional about, okay, I'm going to create like this blog post because I think this is really great. So that's going to motivate you because it doesn't feel like this whole other thing you need to add to maybe your business, which is already probably working really well if you've been doing it for a while. So that is what I have to say about SEO taking time. I do have some additional episodes that I recommend you listen to if you're interested in this topic. The first one is an episode I did way back, episode 90. It's called Slow versus Fast Marketing. And I talk about this idea of just like your different platforms and channels having different speeds, and that they're all effective in a way. You need to put the right expectations on each one. And that can help liberate some of that stress of like, I need leads now. If that's your case, maybe SEO can still work for you, but you're also doing something else to get faster leads. Then I really recommend, like I already mentioned, episode 130, which is SEO for new sites. And I really kind of lay out the foundation of what it looks like to do SEO for a newer site. And then I also have episode 131, which is SEO for older sites. And this is for sites that have been around for more than 3 years. And so that episode is very useful as well if you're looking to improve your site that's been around for more than 3 years. And then the last episode I wanted to recommend, these are all really great episodes, is episode 136, not that long ago, and that's the SEO process. And that's going to help you just get more of a sense of what it feels like to do SEO intentionally and how to really see the high level picture of taking action on your search marketing. All right, friends, I love talking about this stuff. I hope that I've inspired you and I've gotten you to think about a little bit more clearly about how you can take action on your search marketing. And I will catch you next week on the Digitally Overwhelmed podcast. Bye.